When I woke up from the coma, the first thing I heard wasn't a doctor's voice or the hum of a machine. It was my son. And what he said made my heart go still. When he dies, everything in the trust and the company will be ours. The words drifted through the sterile air of the hospital room, calm, practical, cruel. I kept my eyes closed. My body felt buried under concrete, my throat sealed by the tube that kept me alive. But my mind was awake. Wide awake. That voice belonged to Ryan Ward, my son. The same boy I used to lift onto my shoulders when I came home from the yard, the boy who used to chase fireflies behind the house in Boulder. Now his tone was clipped, hard-edged, the voice of a man who'd learned to measure love in assets and shares. Another voice answered him, soft, clean, but hollow. All you need is the power of Attorney Ryan. Once the doctor signs, it's legal. Melissa, his wife, Evelyn. My late wife had seen her once at dinner, and later whispered to me that woman's eyes don't know warmth. Now, in the cold rhythm of the heart monitor, I knew exactly what Evelyn had meant. Ryan exhaled sharply. You don't understand. If he's alive and doesn't sign, we get nothing. The Texas merger dies. Melissa replied without emotion. I've already taken care of the Aspen property. Appraisers come next week. Once it's listed, the rest will follow. Just handle the paperwork with Mark. The machine beside me beeped steadily, that unfeeling pulse of synthetic life. Each tone was a reminder I was alive only to be measured, debated, erased. I could hear them moving paper, rustling shoes, tapping against tile. Ryan's voice dropped. Mark owes me. I covered his loan last year. He'll sign off on whatever medical record I put in front of him. Melissa's reply came smooth, final. As long as your father doesn't wake up. I forced my breath to steady. Any change in that line on the monitor, any flutter, and they'd call a nurse and the plan would move faster. I needed to listen. I needed to survive. Then came the soft clicks of Melissa's heels. She stopped beside me. Her hand rested lightly on my shoulder, cold, deliberate. See no reflexes, she whispered. Just wait. The door opened, closed. Silence folded back around me. The air smelled of antiseptic and distance. I didn't know how long I'd been gone. The last thing I remembered was the conference room in Denver, my voice echoing off the glass, the argument about the merger, and then the pain. A white-hot bolt splitting through my skull, then darkness, and now my son's voice talking about me like a contract that had reached its expiration date. I thought of Evelyn, of the way her hand felt in mine the night she died in 2019. She had left me a letter written in her careful, looping script. Don't let your kindness become the knife they use against you. Now lying here, those words didn't sound like advice anymore. They sounded like prophecy. Time crawled. The beeping was the only sound keeping me tethered to this world. I thought of Boulder, the mornings Evelyn and I used to drink cheap coffee and dream about buying our first truck. I thought of Ryan, 10 years old, grinning behind the wheel in the freight yard, pretending to be me. I thought of the promise of family and how quickly that promise could rot in silence. Then a sound. The door opened again. A different rhythm of footsteps. Slower. Heavier. Night shift, a woman's voice said. The clatter of metal trays, the faint hiss of machines adjusting. There was something in her tone measured familiar, like a voice I'd once heard through a storm. You can hear me, can't you, Franklin? It took everything I had to move a finger. Just one. A flicker so small I thought I imagined it, but she saw. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I knew it. Don't worry. They don't know. My name's Linda Foster. I'm your night nurse, and I won't let them do this. Her hand found my wrist, warm, firm, real. For the first time since I woke, I felt something human in that room. She spoke again, slower now. Ryan asked me to sign the authorization to give them control. I refused. I knew your wife, Evelyn. She wouldn't have wanted this. The name hit me like wind through a cracked window. Evelyn. Still protecting me even now through someone else's courage. Linda leaned closer. Rest. When the time comes, I'll help you. Her pen scratched across the chart, a sound sharp enough to pierce the fog in my head. Then the door clicked shut behind her. Through the slit beneath the door, the hallway light spilled in a thin gold line against the dark. The monitor kept its beat, but it no longer sounded mechanical. Each beep was a drum, each breath a promise. I thought of Ryan, the boy who once ran barefoot through the yard, now a stranger waiting for his father to die. I thought of Melissa, the smile that never reached her eyes. I knew I couldn't move yet, couldn't fight yet. But I could wait. And waiting was something I had learned well in a lifetime of storms. I closed my eyes and listened as the night swallowed the room. Somewhere deep inside, Evelyn's voice returned soft as wind through pine trees. Don't let your kindness become their weapon. I would wait. I would listen. And then I would rise. That was the first promise I made since the day Evelyn left this world, and I intended to keep it. I don't remember how long that night lasted, only that while the soft pulse of the heart monitor flickered across the white hospital wall, memories began to bleed back into focus. Boulder came first, the narrow road along the mountains, the smell of cold pine in those winter mornings when the snow covered everything in silence. I could almost smell the oil and the metal again, hear the hammer striking in that old warehouse where Evelyn and I started it all. Back then I was just a young mechanical engineer in my 30s, broke angry and freshly unemployed after the company I worked for collapsed. All I had were my hands and an old Ford truck that coughed smoke every time it started. Evelyn told me, "You have the hands of a man who can build something real. So start there with what you have." In 1995, we borrowed $8,000 from a local bank and bought our first truck. I painted the name myself, Ward Haulage and Freight, in uneven white letters on the side of the cargo box. In those early years, it was just me and an old friend from the yard working 16-hour days, 7 days a week. Evelyn handled the books at home on a second-hand calculator, her hair tied up in a messy knot, her fingers stained with ink. At night, we'd sit on the floor of our unfinished kitchen, eating instant noodles out of paper bowls. She once smiled and said, "I like it. This way it smells like the beginning." 10 years later, we had 12 trucks, then 20, then 50. I still remember one March morning, the sunlight cutting through the dusty window of our tiny office when Evelyn walked in holding the newspaper. They'd written an article about us calling Ward Haulage a symbol of Colorado's working spirit. We had 2 children, Ryan and Claire. I named my son after my father, the man who taught me that a man's worth is measured only by whether he keeps his word. Ryan grew up in that small Boulder house where I often came home too late, and Evelyn sat by the kitchen table waiting, her hands folded over a cup of coffee gone cold. I remember the first time I lifted Ryan into the driver's seat of the truck. He was 8. I told him, "Son, this is what your father built with his own hands." He grinned and said, "Someday I'll drive something even bigger." I thought that was pride. I didn't know it would one day turn into something else. Claire was different. She had her mother's calm. When I came home tired, she'd hand me a glass of water and whisper, "You've worked enough, Dad. Rest." I'd smile, pat her head, and go back to my paperwork. I told myself I was doing it all for them, for their future. Then came 2019, Evelyn's diagnosis, stage 4 cancer. It felt like the air left the world that day. I took her to Houston for treatment, but the doctors shook their heads. Too late. For 4 months, I sat beside her bed every night listening to her breathing grow weaker. One evening, she reached for my hand. Her voice was thin but steady. "Frank," she said, "you've spent your life building an empire, but the most important things can't be locked in a safe. Don't let money change the man you are. Dignity, that's the only inheritance that lasts." When she passed, the house in Boulder went silent like a warehouse after the lights go out. I moved through the days like a shadow. Eat, work, sleep, repeat. Ryan had just finished his MBA. He came to me with a plan, said I should retire, let him modernize the company. "It's time, Dad. I can take it from here." I believed him. I believed that blood meant trust, that a son would honor what his father built. So I stepped back, became an advisor in name only. Ryan took the reins. Claire moved to Portland to teach. At first, things looked good. Ryan expanded routes, invested in automation, added tracking software. Reporters called him the new face of logistics. I felt proud, thought Evelyn would have smiled if she'd seen him then. But small cracks began to show. Reports didn't line up. Invoices went missing. The numbers started to feel off. When I asked the accountants, they said Ryan was restructuring. When I called Ryan, he laughed. "Don't worry, Dad. This is a different time. I know how to make things grow faster." And again, I believed him. Then came the whispers that Ward Haulage had signed contracts with shell companies in Texas, that money was moving through layered accounts. I called Ryan into my old office, the one where our family photo still hung on the wall. I asked, "What are you doing, son?" He smiled, tired, defiant. "You don't understand this world anymore, Dad. We're not just moving freight. We're moving data ownership control." I said nothing. But Evelyn's voice came back to me. Ambition can be an engine, or it can be a fire that burns the house down. After that, Ryan stopped visiting on Sundays. He stopped calling. Melissa's smile became sharper, her words softer, emptier. She reminded me of the brokers I'd dealt with all my life, the ones who could appraise a man faster than they could shake his hand. I couldn't remember when I started being afraid of my own son's eyes. Then came the last afternoon, the one before the stroke. We were in a boardroom with our Japanese partners finalizing a contract worth $18 million, the company's future. Ryan sat beside me, talking smoothly, but his eyes weren't on the papers. They were on the folder in his hand, a folder labeled Power of Attorney. I asked, "What's that?" he said. "Just routine paperwork." Before I could read it, pain exploded behind my eyes. The world went black. I heard chairs fall, someone shouting my name, and then nothing. When I opened my eyes again, I was here surrounded by white walls, machines, and the smell of disinfectant. And I heard those voices. My son's, his wife's, talking about my death like it was a deadline. Lying in that bed, I saw every face again. Ryan, Melissa, Claire, Evelyn. Every choice, every moment of trust that had led me here. I realized I had loved too much, believed too easily, and let greed grow inside my own house. Evelyn's last words came back. "Dignity is the only true inheritance." Maybe I had lost that when I handed everything to a man who didn't yet understand what it was worth. The morning light crept in through the blinds, tracing the veins in my hands like old rivers. I knew I didn't have much time, but as long as there was breath in me, I wouldn't let Ward Haulage become a monument to betrayal. I would rise again one last time and protect what Evelyn believed in all her life. Out in the hallway, I heard the nurse's footsteps, soft and steady, mingling with the rhythm of the heart monitor. I closed my eyes and Boulder faded like an old photograph, leaving behind only one thought, clear and sharp as steel. I had started over once before, and I could do it again. The recovery room lights dimmed to a low, sterile blue, the kind that makes everything look colder than it already is. The pulse monitor glowed faintly on the wall, its rhythm slow and even, and the steady drip from the IV was the only sound breaking the silence. Then the door eased open. Soft footsteps, the faint scent of antiseptic. A woman's voice, low, calm, sure. "Are you holding on, Franklin?" I recognized that voice before my mind could catch up to the memory. Linda Foster. I'd met her once briefly years ago when Evelyn was in the ICU. Linda had been the one steady presence in a room full of panic. Even when others cried, she stood still, eyes calm, hands steady. She had that rare kind of grace people only find after seeing too much pain. Now she was here again. She moved closer, checked the ventilator, adjusted the heart monitor. When her hand brushed my wrist, her touch was warm, a small rebellion against the chill of this place. Then almost in a whisper she said, "I know you can hear me." I fought for a flicker of movement, the tiniest pull of an eyelid. It wasn't much, but she noticed. A quiet nod, a faint smile, understanding. Her voice lowered. "They don't think you're conscious, Franklin. They think you're gone, a living shell. Ryan's working with the attorney to extend your incapacitation. He's claiming you're unfit to make legal decisions." She paused. "I heard them this morning, and I don't feel right about it." I tried to speak to thank her, but all that came out was a shallow hiss through the tube. Linda leaned closer. "Don't force it," she said softly. "I'm not a woman who believes in premonitions, but this time I'm going to trust one." I knew Evelyn. I made her a promise that if you were ever in danger, I wouldn't turn away. Hearing Evelyn's name was like being hit by a wave I wasn't ready for. My throat tightened. I could feel the gravity of that vow. Something passed quietly between two women, one dying, one watching her die. Linda glanced toward the hallway, then leaned in again. "Ryan came in earlier. He asked me to sign off on a medical report, confirming your neurological function hasn't recovered." She hesitated. I refused. Her voice hardened. "He got angry, said I was interfering in family matters. I told him sometimes it's the family that needs watching the most." There was a silence long loaded. Then she turned back to me. "I'll help you," she said, "but we have to do it the right way." She opened a drawer, rummaged through a stack of personal belongings, and took something out. A watch, steel-banded, scratched along the face. My heart clenched. Evelyn's anniversary gift. 20 years of marriage etched into every mark. I thought it was gone. Linda wiped it gently with a piece of gauze, then fastened it around my wrist. Her voice was almost a murmur. "Your son wants everything to be legal. So will we. I'm activating the indirect recording function. Every time they visit this, we'll capture the conversation. No one will suspect a medical Bluetooth device." The cold metal touched my skin, familiar and foreign, all at once. Then came the faint click of a button. A small sound, but in that room it was thunder. A beginning. Linda exhaled slowly, her voice low, as if each word carried a moral weight she had to lift on her own. "I know I'm breaking the rules, Franklin. I shouldn't be doing this. But I've seen too many families like this when money stands between blood. Everything gets dirty." She sat down beside me. The soft light painted her face lines of age, but eyes still sharp, alive. In them I saw something I hadn't seen since Evelyn quiet courage. Outside, a doctor's footsteps echoed down the corridor, fading. Linda waited until the silence settled again. "They'll be back in the morning," she said. I heard Melissa on the phone with their attorney. "They want the paperwork signed before the end of the week." She looked at me. "You don't have much time." I tried to grip her hand, but all I managed was a tremor. She placed her palm gently over mine. "Easy," she said. "I know you're still here. Let me do my part." Her tone had the steady calm of someone who had spent years sitting at the border between life and death. Then I heard it, the faint vibration from the watch, a quiet hum and silence again. The door swung open, a rush of bright light. Ryan's voice. "How's he doing?" Linda's tone shifted instantly, her professionalism flawless. "Stable," she said. "Vitals are good." Still no verbal response. Ryan walked closer, each step crisp and controlled. I kept my eyes closed, every muscle frozen. He leaned over me. "If you can hear me, Dad," he said softly, "I hope you understand. I'm only trying to protect what you built. Sometimes, to preserve a legacy, you have to let go of its creator." Linda drew in a sharp breath, then cut in coldly. "Mr. Ward visiting hours are over. He needs rest." There was a beat of silence, then Ryan chuckled. "I just wanted to say goodbye." His footsteps receded. The door shut. Linda didn't move for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "You heard him, didn't you?" I moved one finger. Slowly. "Enough." She nodded. "Then we begin." She wrote a note in the chart, her pen steady, deliberate. Then she glanced at her watch. 5 hours left in my shift. I'll be back before the changeover. No one gets in here unless it's absolutely necessary. Her footsteps faded down the hall. The door closed softly behind her. The light dimmed again. I lay there feeling the cool weight of the steel watch on my wrist, a pulse of memory and purpose beneath the metal. Fear mixed with something else, something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. For the first time since waking up in this sterile tomb, I wasn't completely alone. Someone was on my side. The heart monitor kept its rhythm patient and unrelenting, counting down to a moment that hadn't yet come. I closed my eyes, and in the darkness behind my eyelids, I saw the faint blue glow of the watch, the only thing in this frozen world still bearing proof that I was alive. Morning crept into the ward with the sound of rubber soles and rolling wheels. Somewhere down the corridor I heard Linda's voice, steady professional speaking, with the attending physician. I didn't open my eyes. I just listened. Beyond that closed door, another kind of war was being fought, the kind that used to take place in rooms where I once commanded every decision. Now I could only hear it through the echo of my own imagination. A few miles away, inside a glass building in downtown Denver, my son was at war in his own way. Ryan sat across from Mark Reynolds in the office of Reynolds and Patel Law Group. I had chosen Mark once for his caution, his decency. A middle-aged man with a kind face, heavy shoulders, and glasses that always slid down his nose. But now I was nothing more than a folder on his desk, a file with my name printed in black ink. Ryan opened his leather briefcase, took out a stack of papers stamped with the hospital seal. His voice was smooth, deliberate. "My father's been declared temporarily incapacitated. I need authority to act on his behalf to protect the company while he's in treatment." Mark adjusted his glasses and scanned the pages. His eyes lingered on the neurological evaluation. Finally, he looked up. He might recover, Ryan. I've seen cases like this. A few more weeks, maybe less. Ryan leaned back in the chair, fingers laced a faint smile curving at the edges of his mouth, the kind of smile people wear when they already know the outcome. You think I'm trying to hurt him? I'm trying to keep Ward Haulage from collapsing. The Texas expansion deal can't wait. My father can't manage it in his condition. Mark exhaled. I understand, but I need official verification, not just this form. Ryan's gaze sharpened. The hospital signed it. If you're worried, you can hold the original as assurance. Mark hesitated, spinning his pen between his fingers. I knew that look. I'd seen it in too many men, the weight of debt pressing down, until morality bent under its own fatigue. Ryan placed an envelope on the desk and nudged it forward. I trust you, Mark. My family trusts you. All I need is your signature on this temporary power of attorney. That's it. This is a family matter, not a federal one. You're just keeping the company stable, nothing more. Snow drifted past the window white against the gray Denver sky. Mark stared at the envelope for a long time, then nodded. I'll sign temporarily until there's another medical evaluation. Ryan smiled. That's all I needed. While that meeting took place, another story unfolded somewhere else. My daughter Claire was stepping off an early flight from Portland, her breath clouding in the frigid air. I didn't know what she had heard, maybe from an old employee, maybe from one of Ryan's friends. Claire had always felt the shifts in our family before anyone else. Evelyn used to call it the burden of seeing too clearly. That evening, Linda told me what happened. Your daughter came to visit, she said quietly. She looked tired, worried. She stood in the hallway for a long time before asking if I was taking good care of you. Linda said she told her I'm doing everything I can. Claire nodded, then whispered, I just want to be sure my father is treated fairly. Linda paused before adding, she looked at me with the same eyes your wife had, steady and unafraid. Hearing that, I felt something stir in me, warmth, faint but real. Claire was the only one left who still saw me as a man, not an account, not a signature waiting to expire. Linda went on, her voice soft. She asked why I always take the night shift. I told her because daytime is full of people pretending. At night, the truth has nowhere to hide. Claire didn't reply, she just nodded. Then she asked to see me. Linda said she sat by my bed holding my hand through the blanket. I couldn't move, but I felt it, her warmth seeping into my skin, the same quiet love Evelyn had given me in her final days. Dad, she whispered, I don't know if you can hear me, but I'll stay until I know you're safe. That voice, soft trembling, could have been Evelyn's. For a moment, time folded, and the years vanished. Across town, Ryan and Melissa were having dinner at a sleek Italian restaurant, the kind with wine lists thicker than Bibles and conversations sharper than knives. Their voices, if you stripped the polish away, were all business. Did Mark sign? Melissa asked. Ryan nodded. Temporary authority. We've got 4 weeks before renewal. She smiled, pleased. And Claire, he shrugged. She's sentimental. I'll make her believe I'm protecting him. I pictured that scene and felt something inside me split open. Part of me still wanted to believe my son was lost, not corrupted, that this was a detour, not a betrayal. But deep down I knew. He'd crossed a line that doesn't fade with time. That night, Linda came back to check the machines. She sat down beside me, her voice low. Mark was here this afternoon. He met with the ICU director to confirm your status. I overheard them say you've shown minor response. When he left, I saw Ryan waiting in the hallway. He was with Melissa. He said something to her and then he laughed. She paused. I didn't like that laugh, Franklin. It sounded like a man who'd already won without ever playing fair. Cold slid through my chest. Linda added, I checked the security feed. Every time they visit, I'll know. The watch is working perfectly. It records up to 8 hours. Once I sync it in the office, everything will upload automatically. I might have managed a nod, or maybe it was only a thought that felt like motion. Either way, she understood. Outside, an ambulance siren echoed and faded into the night. Red light flashed across the ceiling like a warning. I looked at my reflection in the window, faint, almost gone. A man who once commanded a fleet of trucks, who negotiated with oil firms and unions, now reduced to a pair of eyes and a heartbeat. And yet somehow I was still here. I thought of Mark, of the envelope, of the trembling hands. He wasn't evil, just afraid. Debt makes men blind. I'd seen it ruin better men than him. Maybe when he finally saw the truth, he'd have the courage to make it right. The heart monitor kept its rhythm. The hallway lights blinked softly. The real fight hadn't even begun. In an office of glass and lies, my son was signing papers. In this sterile room, I was gathering proof, sound by sound, breath by breath, for the day I could finally open my eyes and make them all face what they'd done. Through the narrow window, snow drifted down fine and weightless as chalk dust. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about the company or the money or the empire I'd built. I was thinking about survival. Because if I died here, it wouldn't just be me that disappeared. Evelyn's truth, her faith in me, would be buried too beneath their lies. So I closed my eyes, breathing slow, syncing each inhale with the machine's steady pulse. And as the night deepened over Denver, I knew somewhere down the hall Linda was still awake, and the steel watch on my wrist kept glowing faintly, the only living eye left open in the dark. The next morning I woke beneath the kind of hospital light that has no hour. A sterile white glare that could be dawn or midnight eternity in fluorescent form. Linda came in carrying a metal tray. Her voice was low even. Better today. Your heart's steady. I couldn't speak, but I managed to move one finger. She noticed. A small nod, a knowing look. I know you can hear me, she said. All day I listened to the faint hum of machines, to the squeak of cartwheels, to the murmurs that drifted in from the nurses' station. But what I was waiting for wasn't any of that. I was waiting for the sound of my daughter's footsteps. I knew Claire was searching, that she wasn't as easily deceived as her brother imagined. That afternoon, Linda told me what she'd learned. Claire had gone to the Ward haulage office downtown. She'd asked to see the operational reports. Ryan told the staff it was an internal matter, but Claire had a friend in IT, someone she could trust. Through that computer, she found a shell company, Ward Logistics Technologies Incorporated, just 3 months ago. 40% of the parent company's shares had been transferred there. The sole owner listed Ryan Ward. Linda told me all this while changing the IV bag. Her voice didn't rise, didn't dramatize, but every word landed like the slow pressure of a blade. Claire had called Mark Reynolds, the family attorney. Asked him what was going on. He deflected, said restructuring was normal, nothing to worry about. Then Claire asked the one question that mattered. Did my father sign over his authority? Mark went silent, then said, I'll call you back. He never did. I knew why. Mark was trapped, good man, weak spine. Debt can do that to you. It doesn't change your morals, just makes them negotiable. I didn't feel anger, only pity. By evening, the hallway lights dimmed to amber. Linda pulled the curtain halfway, muting the glow. She said Claire called. I could hear the weight in her voice. She was crying. I told her her father's still here, still fighting. I told her not to tell anyone, especially Ryan. Linda paused. She said one thing before hanging up. If he needs me, I'll do whatever it takes. Linda opened her coat pocket and took out a small silver USB stick. She plugged it into the medical monitor, opened a file, and pressed play. Ryan's voice filled the room, cold, composed, each syllable precise as a scalpel. We have to sell before the court requests a reassessment. If they learn he's responsive, it's over. Then Melissa's voice, smooth and practical. The paperwork's ready. We just need Mark's confirmation. I closed my eyes. My heart kicked against the monitors. Hearing my son's voice, the same voice that once asked me, Dad, when can I drive the truck now, plotting my erasure, felt like watching my own blood turn to ice. A tear broke loose, slow and heavy, soaking into the pillow. Linda placed her hand gently on my shoulder. There's only one way left, she said. You have to leave this place before they move to sell the company. I opened my eyes, everything blurring into white and shadow. She went on, they've scheduled a meeting with the bank for Thursday. If the collateral transfer goes through, they'll have control of every asset. After that, they can sell at will. I understood. Escape wasn't a choice, it was survival. But how I was still half machine, half man, tethered to tubes and monitors. Linda looked at me as if she'd heard the question forming in my head. I'll take care of it, she said. That night, sleep refused to come. I thought of Evelyn, her voice, her warning. Don't let money change who you are. I had believed my family was different. I was wrong. At dawn, Linda returned carrying a small envelope. She slid out a document, crisp, folded once. This is your original medical file, she said. The unedited one. I made a copy before they updated the record. It includes the physician's signature, confirming cognitive response proof you're not in a full coma. She hesitated, then added, I sent a secure copy to Claire. If anything happens, she'll know what to do. I tried to thank her, but my throat only rasped. She pressed her palm over my chest. Don't waste your strength. We're not at the part where gratitude helps. The intercom crackled. Shift change announced. Linda glanced at the clock. I've got 10 minutes before Ryan gets here, she said. I'm activating the recorder now. She lifted my hand, pressed a hidden button on the wristwatch. A blue light blinked once, then went still. The door opened. Ryan's voice, polite, measured. Morning, Dad. You look better. He turned to Linda. The doctor said he reacts when you say his name. Linda's tone was even. Yes, but he's still weak. Try not to overstimulate him. Ryan stepped closer, his voice dropping. I don't know how much you've overheard, but don't meddle in my family's business. I know the law. Linda's reply was calm steel under velvet. So do I. And I know where the law ends and decency begins. Ryan gave a soft, humorless laugh. I need everything signed by the end of the week. Understood, I won't let an old man in a hospital bed dictate the future of hundreds of employees. Linda's voice stayed level. He's still the founder of this company. Ryan's answer came like a knife. Founding doesn't mean ownership forever. Footsteps. A door closing. Silence. Linda exhaled. He's moving faster than I thought. She sat beside me, pulled out her notebook, started writing. The lamp cast a thin light across her face, deep lines at the corners of her eyes, steady hands, eyes bright with something harder than fear. You have a good daughter, she said quietly. Claire's trying to meet with Mark, but he won't talk easily. She looked up, meeting my gaze as if she could hear what I hadn't said. I'll do what it takes to keep you alive long enough to defend yourself. Outside night folded over Denver. The hallway lights faded to gold. The heart monitor ticked like a metronome, counting down the hours I had left. Ryan was signing everything away, trading legacy for control, turning time itself into a weapon. Linda cleaned her instruments, then turned to me one last time. Her voice was low, deliberate. You have to stay strong. If things go too far, there won't be a way back. I watched her face illuminated by the glow of the monitor, tired-lined, resolute. I'm not doing this for money, she said. I'm doing this for Evelyn. I closed my eyes. The sound of my heartbeat filled the room, steady, patient, relentless. Out there, my son was using numbers to erase his father's history. And here in the stillness, listening to time itself ticking toward a reckoning. The watch on my wrist glowed faintly blue, pulsing with quiet defiance. A small, living signal of justice still breathing somewhere deep inside the dark. That morning, Denver lay under a sky the color of wet steel. The clouds hung low, heavy as fabric stretched across the city's glass towers, pressing the air flat and dim. Linda's voice filled the room, low, steady, precise as she told me what had happened. Ryan had called a shareholders' meeting at the 12th floor of Ward Haulage headquarters. She described him in detail, the light gray suit, the dark red tie, the calm confidence of a man who believed the room already belonged to him. He stood before a glowing screen of slogans and graphs, his words sharp and polished like they'd been rehearsed for weeks. Ward Freight is entering the age of automation, he declared. AI-driven logistics, blockchain fuel tracking, cloud-based fleet management, all through our new platform, Ward Logistics Technologies. We're no longer a trucking company. We are the future of intelligent freight. Linda said. The room went silent. The same men and women who once rode out snowstorms for me, who built this company on calloused hands and diesel fumes, now sat still, eyes lowered, except for one. A young technician named Jake Turner. He sat at the back of the conference room, quiet fingers resting on a laptop. While Ryan spoke, Jake opened a hidden drive and backed up the entire presentation merger. Plans, bank attachments, everything. I could see it in my mind as she spoke, a slow-motion scene, fluorescent light flickering over Jake's face. His jaw clenched, the glow of the monitor, painting his skin pale. A kid I'd hired a year ago when no one else would. He grew up in the industrial blocks of Aurora. I remembered signing his probationary contract myself. He still kept a framed photo of our first maintenance crew on his desk. Hearing that, something inside me broke quietly. Meanwhile, Mark Reynolds, the lawyer I once trusted with my company's backbone, received a bank alert. An $18 million transaction. Collateralized by Ward Haulage stock. He read the document twice, his chest tightening. The deal required my signature or that of a legally authorized proxy. Mark called Ryan. His voice, she said, was already shaking. Ryan, what are you doing? Your father isn't dead. If he recovers, this deal collapses. Ryan's tone was controlled, almost bored. It's all legal, Mark. My father's incapacitated. I'm protecting what he built. Mark went silent. For the first time in his career, he was afraid of what he'd just become part of. Back in the hospital, Linda came in with urgency in her eyes. She shut the door, leaned against the bed rail, and spoke quickly. Ryan's moving faster than I thought. He just announced a merger with a Texas tech conglomerate. I met her gaze, asking without words what that meant. If the deal goes through, she said, every asset transfers to the subsidiary, the one in his name. I managed a small twitch of my hand. She understood immediately. Linda pulled a small phone from her pocket, tapped open a secure folder. It held an email from Jake sent that morning. The subject line read, They're selling everything. Through her eyes, I read the words I could no longer touch. My life, the trucks, the contracts, the long nights Evelyn once waded through, now being reduced to figures on a spreadsheet. Linda's voice dropped. "I think he's watching us," she said. This afternoon, Ryan called the hospital director, asked about my shift schedule, about the ICU cameras. He suspects someone's helping you. Her hands trembled when she said it. She was risking everything. Her job, her license, her future. I wanted to tell her to stop, to walk away, before it swallowed her too. But before the thought finished forming, she looked at me and said softly, "Evelyn once told me, if you can't protect the people you love, then what's the point of surviving?" At that same hour in a restaurant below the Denver National Bank, Mark Reynolds met with Ryan. The clink of silverware, the hum of polite conversation around them. Mark leaned forward. "What are you doing, Ryan?" "Your father's not gone. If he wakes up, this entire deal's fraud." Ryan sipped his wine, smiling faintly. "You think I didn't plan for that? I have medical certificates, video statements, everything I need." Mark shook his head. "Sometimes the law can't save a man from himself." Ryan's eyes hardened. "Don't preach to me, Mark. My father ran this company on sentiment. I run it on survival." Back in the ICU, Linda shared what she'd overheard from the staff. "Ryan's coming tomorrow morning," she said. "He's asking to review the security footage." Her voice carried the weight of the decision already forming in her mind. "If he finds what we've done, it's over for both of us." She sat beside me, fingers gripping my hand. "I'll wipe the access logs. I'll transfer the watch data to an external drive. But after that, you have to leave this place, Franklin." My heart froze. Leave, I could barely stand. She leaned closer. "There's no time. Once the hospital certifies permanent incapacity, he controls everything." I asked her with my eyes, "Do you have a plan?" She nodded. "A friend in maintenance owes me a favor. Tomorrow night they'll shut down the security network for a system upgrade. We'll have 5 minutes, that's all." Her voice softened. "If you want to live, that's your window." I closed my eyes, letting the image form the corridors, the flicker of red exit lights, the echo of wheels on tile. Linda risking her career, her freedom, and me, a man stripped of everything but the stubborn pride that had once built an empire. Outside, snow was falling again, thick, soundless, each flake drifting past the window like a piece of memory disintegrating mid-air. From down the hall came the faint rhythm of footsteps fading away. I knew where she was going. She was preparing something larger than either of us, something that could rewrite the ending. And somewhere downtown, in a conference room blazing with artificial light, my son was laughing with investors. He lifted a glass of wine and said, "The future is automation." But here in this cold, white room, I gripped my wrist, the metal of the watch pressing into my skin, pulsing a faint blue light. It was the only living thing that dared to glow in the dark, and it whispered to me with every flicker that someone still believed. Someone still fought back even in silence. The third night, snow fell over Denver like chalk dust, soft, soundless, erasing the city one rooftop at a time. Through the narrow hospital window, I could see it gathering on the ledge, thin as frost on glass. The hallway lights outside my room had dimmed to a tired amber. The clock above the door showed just before 11. I heard Linda's footsteps before I saw her quick, deliberate, the rhythm of someone who'd already made peace with danger. The door opened a sliver. She stepped in, wrapped in a dark coat, a small bag clutched in her hand. Her voice was calm, but every word landed heavy. "The security maintenance starts at 11, she said. You have a temporary discharge order for neurological recovery. This is your only chance. I didn't ask how she managed it. I just looked at her and she understood. From her bag, she took out a different hospital gown, gray instead of blue. She switched the IV lines, disconnected the monitor, and replaced it with a decoy that kept my vitals looping on the nurse's screen. When she removed the oxygen tube, cold air rushed into my chest, sharp and metallic. "Try to stand," she said, steadying me by the shoulders. Her frame was small, but her grip was firm. "I'll push the wheelchair once we clear the door." We moved down the hallway, long, pale, and empty. Emergency lights flickered against the walls like nervous breaths. The only sounds were the slow roll of wheels and the shallow rasp of my breathing. The cameras were down for 7 minutes, that's what she'd said. 7 minutes to disappear. Once we passed the maintenance wing, Linda whispered, "There's a service exit to the parking lot." I could feel the cold leaking through the walls. Outside, the snow had thickened into veils, the wind carving them into ghostly swirls. At the end of the corridor, she stopped to check her phone. 3 minutes, she murmured. Then with a soft click, the electronic door slid open. A rush of night air hit my face, sharp, alive, cutting through the sterile smell of antiseptic. Linda pushed the chair fast and low, her movements smooth, practiced. A security guard passed, nodding at her in passing. "Long night, huh?" he muttered. "Always," she said, and kept walking. Outside, the lot shimmered under the yellow wash of streetlights. Ambulance beacons pulsed red against the snow. At the far end, beneath a row of leafless trees, a black SUV waited with its headlights off. As we neared the back door, swung open. Claire stepped out, bundled in a heavy coat, her breath rising in small clouds. Her face was pale from the cold, but her eyes were bright and unshaken. "Dad," she whispered, voice trembling, "we have to go, now." Linda and Claire helped me into the back seat, wrapped a blanket around me. For a moment, Linda just looked at me, her expression steady, but her eyes betrayed fear. "You're sure about this?" I managed to rasp. She nodded once. "I promised Evelyn I wouldn't abandon you. This is what that promise means." The car engine started the low hum of freedom, and the SUV pulled away from the curb, its tires cutting faint tracks through the snow. Through the rear window, I watched the hospital fade into the mist, its glowing windows receding like the unblinking eyes of the past. On the highway, the wind seeped through the cracks of the door, sharp and clean. I inhaled deeply. It smelled like steel and winter and gasoline, the scent of work, of life, of the road that once defined me. Claire glanced at me in the rearview mirror, her voice breaking. "I thought you'd never wake up." I spoke slowly. "I'm not running, Claire. I'm coming back to reclaim my name." She said nothing. Her tears fell silently, catching the blur of passing lights. The road to Boulder stretched ahead, empty, except for the occasional truck groaning through the dark. Each turn, each rise in the road felt like muscle memory, my body remembering what my mind had almost lost. When we turned onto the narrow lane near Silver Creek, Claire cut the headlights. Moonlight slipped through the clouds, silver and faint. The old cabin appeared at the end of the road, dark, quiet snow laced across its roof. I had built that cabin myself, every beam, every nail. It was where Evelyn read her books in the morning, where the lavender grew wild, where apple pies cooled by the window in the fall. Claire helped me inside. The air was thick with dust and time. The furniture was still covered in white sheets. The rocking chair on the porch leaned against the wall, frozen mid-sway. I ran my hand along the wooden table, the grain rough and cold beneath my fingers. The past was still there, waiting patient as stone. Linda followed, set her bag on the counter, opened a window to let the air in. I brought enough medicine and food for a few days, she said. Tomorrow morning I'll go back to the hospital to clean up the paperwork. Stay here. Don't show yourself. If anyone asks, you're at a private rehab facility. I nodded. She lingered by the wall where Evelyn's photograph hung. Her voice dropped to a whisper. She told me once about this place, the fog over the lake in the mornings. I asked, do you think what we're doing is right? Linda looked at me, her voice steady. Right or wrong doesn't matter anymore. Only survival does. Only survival can lead back to justice. When she left, the SUV's taillights disappeared into the storm. The house fell into silence, broken only by the wind whistling through the eaves. Claire sat across from me, her hands clasped tight. I copied everything from Ryan's phone, she said. Jake Turner helped. He found the merger contracts unsigned, still pending submission to the SEC. If we file the originals first, the court can challenge his legal authority. I felt my pulse slow, every word from her mouth, tightening the threads of purpose inside me. And Mark, I asked. He's hesitating, Claire said quietly. But he's scared. That's something. Outside, the snow kept falling. The lake shimmered faintly through the trees, a pale mirror of a world holding its breath. In my mind, the pieces began to shift, memory and strategy intertwining. I wasn't an invalid anymore. I was a man preparing to take back what was his. Claire's voice broke the silence. If they find out you're gone, what happens then? I looked at her, those same clear eyes, the same quiet resolve that Evelyn had carried all her life. When people live too long in the dark, I said the thing they fear most is light. I asked her to open the old wooden chest in the cabinet. Inside were the remnants of a life's work, original contracts, stock certificates, the first ledger we'd ever printed. Touching them felt like holding the pulse of something I thought had died long ago. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window watching the lake blur beneath the thin veil of mist. In my hand was Evelyn's old note, her handwriting tilted and soft fading with the years. She had written, justice doesn't always live in a courtroom. Sometimes it begins the moment someone stands and says, I'm still here. I stayed there until dawn broke pale and blue cold as forgiveness. But inside me, something warm had begun to move again. Somewhere, Linda was keeping her promise. Somewhere, Ryan still believed his father had vanished. And here, in this quiet house by the frozen lake, I began to write not a confession, but a plan born of memory, faith, and the justice Evelyn left behind. Morning settled over Boulder colder than it should have been. A thick veil of fog floated above the lake, soft as breath. The pine trees by this porch swayed gently, whispering against the glass. I sat at the old table, a half-finished cup of coffee cooling beside my hand, watching the faint light stretch across the water. Claire had flown out the night before. 2 days, she'd said. I told her I trusted her. I did, but each passing hour felt like stone pressing deeper into my chest. Before leaving, she'd left a note folded on the table. I'm meeting Jake Turner. He says he has something you'll need. I held that note for a long time, reading it again and again, trying to picture the young man I'd never met, the one who'd risked his job to save the truth when everyone else chose silence. The watch on my wrist blinked once, faint blue, then dimmed. A secure message from Linda Security Systems restored. Ryan suspects nothing. Everything's stable. I smiled to myself. In this kind of war, silence was sometimes the sharpest weapon. Miles away in Portland, rain fell in thin threads across the runways. The streets glistened under the glow of car lights, yellow ribbons melting into puddles. Claire drove east toward the industrial quarter where Jake worked in a small contractor's office. He was there when she arrived, hunched over his computer, dark circles under his eyes, a paper cup of coffee gone cold. She told me later he hadn't looked surprised to see her. He simply said, "I knew this day would come," then typed a string of commands that lit his screen like a small explosion of truth. Dozens of folders appeared, each labeled Ward Logistics Technologies. "This is the off-site backup," Jake said. "Ryan doesn't know it exists. It holds everything. Wire transfers, shell contracts, falsified route data he used to manipulate cost reports." Claire asked him softly, "Why are you helping my father?" Jake's answer was quiet, steady, the kind that comes from pain carried too long. "Because he was the only man who ever treated me like a person. Everyone else saw an employee. He saw someone who could be more. You don't forget that." He copied the data to a hard drive, encrypting it with a custom key. "You'll have one shot," he said. "Ryan hired an external audit team. Once they notice the missing files, they'll wipe everything." Claire nodded, took the drive, and left into the rain. By evening, she was in a hotel near the airport, laptop, open, rain streaking the window beside her. She uploaded the data to Mark Reynolds through a private encrypted channel Jake had set up. At that same moment in Denver, Mark sat in his office, steam curling from his coffee cup. He saw the email, no sender, no subject line, only one phrase. "Read this if your conscience still works." He opened the file. Hundreds of documents spilled across his screen, financial reports, transfer logs, shell accounts, and finally a short audio recording. Ryan's voice came through low and cold. "Once my father's gone, everything transfers legally. No one can undo it." Mark sat still for a long time. He realized he hadn't just been complicit, he'd been bought. He remembered the day Ryan slid a thick envelope across his desk, the way his voice softened when he said, "I trust you, Mark." Now Mark understood that trust was a noose and he'd been tightening it himself. He rose from his chair and looked out the window. Snow drifted past the glass, slow, deliberate, as something heavy inside him began to fall too. He called Claire. His voice trembled. "Where's your father?" "In Boulder," she said. "Silver Creek Lake." Mark hesitated, then replied, "I'm coming. Don't tell anyone." That evening, Linda called me. Her voice was brief, firm. "Someone's on their way to see you." "Who?" I asked. "A man who betrayed you and wants to make it right." I didn't need to ask further. It was dark when Mark arrived. Claire opened the door. He stepped in his coat, dusted white, his face drawn and older than I remembered. He stopped when he saw me sitting by the fire. "I thought I was helping your family," he said, voice hoarse. "But I was helping them destroy it." I studied him a moment, then said quietly, "There's still time to fix it if you have the courage to face it." He sat down, opened his briefcase, and slid a thick folder across the table. "This is the original trust," he said, untampered. I kept a copy, I don't know why. Maybe instinct. He reached back in and placed another file on top. "And this the bank records. Proof Ryan forged the collateral documents." I lifted the papers. My hands shook. Each page was a piece of buried truth finally exhumed. I looked at him. "Will you testify?" Mark nodded. "I'll contact the FBI. They need to know who the real victim is here." A long silence followed. Then I said, "You're not just saving me, Mark. You're saving yourself." He looked down, eyes wet. "Maybe." Outside, the snow kept falling. The porch light cast a faint halo on the ground. Claire stood by the door watching us, two old men at a wooden table surrounded by ghosts. She whispered Mom would be proud. Her words hit me like breath in winter. I could only nod. When Mark left, he paused at the doorway. I don't know how this ends, he said, but I won't let them rest easy. Then he stepped into the storm, his shadow vanishing into the white. Back in Denver, Ryan sat in his office, the glow of the monitor flickering on his face. He frowned. Access denied. He tried again. Another error. Melissa looked up. What is it? He muttered. Someone's breaching the system. His eyes narrowed hard as wire. Someone's helping the old man. He grabbed his phone, barked an order to a T, then stared up at the ceiling camera, jaw, tight, breath sharp. Meanwhile in Boulder, I sat in the quiet cabin, the fire low, the papers spread before me, the original Trust in my hands. Outside the wind hissed through the pines, the lake whispering beneath its skin of ice. And inside me, for the first time in years, something was moving slow, certain, unstoppable. Like justice finally finding its way home. Morning in Boulder began with a thin film of fog clinging to the window pane. I brewed coffee, my hands still unsteady, but my mind clearer than it had been in days. Claire's phone buzzed on the table, the screen lighting up again and again, Ryan calling over and over every few minutes. She let it ring each time, watched it vibrate until it stopped. Her voice was soft but firm. There's nothing left to say to him right now. I nodded. Words at this stage were just ways to get caught. I opened my old laptop and checked the encrypted inbox. Mark had written. He'd delivered the first packet of evidence to the federal office documentation, showing elder fraud, forged power of attorney, and illegal asset transfers. I read every line, slowly feeling as if I were standing on thin ice, finally beginning to crack, not from danger, but from truth breaking through. By noon, the story leaked. The local news scrolled a short ticker at the bottom of the screen, Ward Freight, under federal review for alleged elder financial misconduct. The camera panned across the mirrored glass of the Denver headquarters. Employees hurried out, heads down, phones pressed tight to their ears. My chest tightened. Those were the same men and women who had carried the company on their backs for years. But I knew if we didn't stop it now, everything they'd built would burn. Late in the afternoon, Mark reported a call from a federal agent. A woman named Olivia Grant measured precise, unhurried. She wanted to meet in person to collect the originals. Mark said she'd asked about the timeline of the trust signatures, about the moment of my stroke, about the recordings from the watch. When he hung up, he sat in his car in the parking lot for several minutes before driving to the meeting. His last message to me read simply, "This time I'm doing my job as an officer of the law." In Denver, Ryan was unraveling. He called Claire again. No answer. He phoned Mark's office. The secretary said he was in a meeting with federal investigators. Ryan slammed his hand against the desk, the glass of water tipping over, spreading a dark stain across the wood, like oil leaking on the floor of an old warehouse. Melissa stood by the window, pale, watching the street below. "What do we do now?" she asked. Ryan's jaw tightened. "Wipe everything. All charity records, every transfer, every email thread. Delete the backups." She sat down, fingers flying over the keyboard, deleting files, clearing inboxes, moving one large transfer to her personal account as a reserve fund. They didn't know the system had been under a federal trace since morning. On a monitor 2 floors below FBI headquarters, a small red light blinked. Wire fraud always announces itself in panic. Linda called me not long after. Her tone carried a quiet satisfaction she tried to hide. "The evening news ran it," she said. "No formal charges yet, but they used the right legal phrasing. Exactly what you and Mark prepared." She added that Ryan had called the hospital asking about the ICU camera footage. The admin told him it was auto-deleted after 72 hours, she said, then gave a short laugh, the kind that deflates a balloon without popping it. I turned to Claire. Open the laptop. She did. I typed a short email to Ryan. I'm alive. And I remember every word you said. When I hit send, a gust rattled the window, a soft knock of wind against glass like punctuation on a sentence that had taken too long to finish. Claire stared at the screen, silent for a few seconds, then closed it gently. An hour later, 2 patrol cars stopped outside the Ward Freight Building. Officers stepped out, badges glinting under the gray sky. Inside, the lobby fell into a hush. Ryan emerged from the elevator, composed on the surface, eyes tight underneath. Melissa clutched her handbag, her knuckles white. Moments later, 2 federal agents and a legal officer from the bureau entered, holding a warrant. We're here for the main server room, the finance department, and the executive office, one said. Ryan demanded to know on what grounds. Agent Grant showed him the document, reading the clauses slowly. For a moment he froze. Then he swallowed hard. My father's dead, he said. Everything he owned is legally mine. Grant didn't blink. There's no death certificate on record, she said. And there are inconsistencies in your filings. Ryan's voice rose instinctively. But he's dead. The words hung in the air, loud, irreversible. Even he seemed to realize he'd just confessed to something much larger. That night, every network ran the footage. Agents taping off glass doors, yellow ribbons crossing the lobby file cabinets, sealed with evidence tags. The crawl beneath the anchor's voice read Ward Freight and Ward Logistics Technologies under investigation for elder fraud and document falsification. I sat in the cabin by the fire, listening to the wind sweep through the pines. The television murmured in the background, the reporter's steady voice like the hum of a distant freight train. My phone vibrated. A message from Linda, a screenshot of the news segment. She wrote, I was on night shift when it aired. Couldn't help smiling when I saw the headline. I pictured her smile, small, tired, the kind worn by people who've seen too much pain, yet still keep faith in the idea of justice. I replied with one word. Thank you. She texted back, if the roads aren't frozen by morning, I'll come by. Claire sat beside me, watching the screen fade to black. Mom would be proud of you, she whispered. I shook my head. No. She'd be sad it had to go this far to find what's right. Claire didn't argue. In her silence, I heard agreement, regret, and a promise neither of us dared to speak. Night deepened. The bolder sky turned to ink. Far off, a coyote cried across the ridge, then went quiet. I took Claire's notebook from the table and began writing a list of what came next. Mark would hand over the originals and request witness protection if needed. Jake would maintain the cloud backups. Linda would keep watch at the hospital, sustaining the illusion of my recovery therapy. And I would stay here waiting for the moment when stepping back into the light meant reclaiming my own name. I closed the notebook and dimmed the lamp. The fire still glowed enough to keep the cold at bay. On the table, my laptop chimed one new message. Mark again. He said the first meeting with Olivia Grant's team had gone better than expected. They're calm, he wrote, thorough. They see the whole picture now. Be careful, Franklin. Desperate men do desperate things. I closed the screen. The house creaked as the wood contracted in the cold. Somewhere down the hill, tires slipped on black ice, a car skidding, then catching traction again. I thought of Ryan, the boy I'd once taught to ride a bike down the gravel road behind our house. I didn't know what he'd face tomorrow, or whether there was still a corner of his heart untouched by greed. But I knew the silence between us was no longer fear. It was the calm before truth arrived. The federal courthouse in Denver smelled faintly of old wood and cold air that morning, a February light so dry and sharp it could have cut glass. When I stepped into the courtroom, my hand trembled around the cane. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, falling across the benches in long, pale stripes, the kind that divide what's gone from what still remains. Heads turned. Some whispered. Most didn't. The echo of footsteps and polished shoes filled the air, the sound of a room where people are forced to face the truth. At the front sat Ryan in a dark suit, hair combed perfectly, but the confidence he once wore like armor was gone. Beside him, Melissa, pale, small, her fingers locked tight around her purse. Across the aisle, Claire sat between Mark and Linda. Her head bowed, shoulders tense, a tremor running through her when her brother looked her way. Judge Evelyn Porter, silver-haired, clear-voiced, calm as a winter river, began to read the charges. The United States District Court for Colorado fraud against an elder, falsification of legal documents, abuse of power of attorney. Each word echoed through the wood-paneled chamber like the sound of a gavel against stone. I listened as the story of my life, or what was left of it, was read back to me in the cold grammar of law. Then Mark rose. He opened his worn leather briefcase, pulled out the original family trust, the one Ryan had altered, and laid it on the evidence table. Next came the authentic medical records, proving I had full mental capacity when my signature was forged. And finally, the recording from the watch. The sound filled the room, Ryan's voice calm and certain. Once he's gone, everything will be ours. Melissa's answer, soft but clear. Just make sure the doctor signs it. Underneath their words, I could hear the faint, steady beep of the heart monitor, my own pulse thin as a thread woven between betrayal and breath. When it ended, silence. The judge's gaze moved to Ryan. Do you have anything you wish to say? He stood, looked around the courtroom, then at me. His eyes were bloodshot. His voice cracked. Dad, can you forgive me? For a moment I didn't see the man who tried to steal my life, only the boy who once chased me through the warehouse yard asking why the wind smelled like metal. I met his gaze. I forgive you, I said quietly, but justice won't. The room stilled, the kind of silence that feels like snow before it falls. I heard the creak of benches, the small, uneven breaths of strangers. Claire's tears slipped soundlessly. Linda's hand rested on my shoulder, steady, warm. Mark stood still, head bowed, a man who had walked the long road of regret to its end. Judge Porter's voice returned firm but measured. Ryan Ward. She read for the crimes of elder financial fraud and falsification of legal documents. This court sentences you to 10 years suspended and permanent prohibition from managing or directing any business entity. Melissa Ward. She continued for wire fraud and unlawful asset transfer, 3 years probation and civil penalties. Then she paused, glancing toward Claire, then to me. The remaining assets and operations of Ward Freight are to be reinstated under the authority of Claire Ward as the rightful beneficiary of the original trust. The gavel struck once sharp final. It sounded like a bell tolling for an era long dead. Ryan lowered his head, shoulders collapsing inward. I didn't feel triumph, only a hollow kind of quiet, the kind that comes when a wound closes but still remembers the knife. Evelyn had once told me that dignity is the only inheritance worth fighting for. And sitting there, I finally understood what she meant. Outside, the Denver sky was clear and thin as glass. The air burned cold. Cameras waited at the steps, microphones poised. We walked past them without speaking. At the car, Claire turned to me. Do you want to see the company one last time? I nodded. We drove through downtown, the city's reflection gliding across the windshield like a moving photograph. Ward Freight stood tall and silent, the mirrored facade catching the last of the winter light. Workers were on ladders, removing the metal letters from the entrance. The name I'd built my life around clanged softly as it came down. The wind picked up scattering dust bits of snow and the ghosts of everything that used to matter. I stood and watched, not angry, not even sad, just still. Claire came to my side. "I'm keeping it," she said, "but it won't be the same company. Freight powered by clean energy, zero emissions. It's time to move forward." I looked at her, nodded. She had her mother's kind of vision, the kind that saw beginnings where others saw ruin. Linda smiled faintly. "I think I'll finally retire," she said. "Maybe open a small clinic up north. Then I'll make sure to come in for my checkups," I told her. Her laugh was soft, the sound of spring pushing against the cold. When they got into the car, I turned back toward the building one last time. The glass doors reflected me, older, slower, but standing upright. Where the letters had been small holes dotted the wall, the wind singing through them in a dry, metallic hum. Maybe that was the sound of endings, or maybe of something beginning again. On the drive back to Boulder, the mountains rose blue and patient on the horizon. The sun slid low, gilding the snow with light so familiar it ached, the same light from that first morning when Evelyn and I stood outside the garage with our new company sign, laughing like fools with hope. Her last letter came back to me, "Don't let money change the man you are." I smiled. It had taken years, loss and betrayal, to learn it, but I had kept that promise. As the car crossed the narrow bridge, a gust of wind swept through the open window. I breathed it in, clean, sharp, full of life. It felt like the ashes of everything old being carried off. Ahead, the road opened wide, a ribbon of light cutting through the mountains. The pines stood tall along the ridge, silent sentinels guarding the truth that had finally found its way home. I placed my hand over my chest, feeling the slow, steady rhythm beneath. After everything, justice had awakened, not with fury, but with the quiet strength of a man who'd walked through the fire and still found himself standing in the light. A year had passed since the day I walked out of the federal courthouse. Winter came early to Boulder that year, the kind of cold that swallowed sound. Snow lay heavy along the road that led to the lake, and the old cabin I called home had grown too quiet for a man who'd survived a storm. Sometimes in the stillness I'd think of Claire, the way she stood before the whiteboard at Ward Freight, sleeves rolled up, outlining her new vision. The light caught in her eyes the way it once did in Evelyn's, steady, certain, unafraid of the waves ahead. She said the company wouldn't chase profits anymore. It would run green routes, clean freight for the western states, proof that trucks could carry both cargo and conscience. I didn't say much, just nodded. Evelyn would have been proud. Linda retired soon after helping Claire finalize the transition. She moved back to Boulder, bought a small house near Chautauqua Park, and opened a tiny clinic with a hand-painted sign over the door. She called a couple of times each month, asked if I was eating right, reminded me not to stay up too late. I always told her I was fine. But most nights, I sat by the window, watching the wind comb through the Rockies, sounding like a slow farewell to the years that had already gone. Reporters kept reaching out, wanting to retell the story. Some even showed up at my porch, cameras in hand. I told them they had the wrong man. "Justice doesn't need noise," I said. "It only needs memory." When spring came, I called Mark. He'd left law now, living in a small apartment that overlooked Washington Park. We met one morning in a corner cafe, the kind that smelled of rain and roasted beans. I told him I didn't want the company anymore, I just wanted the truth to stay where it belonged. He stared into his cup for a long time, then said, "The truth's already written, Franklin, and sometimes it isn't on paper. It's in how people look at each other after the damage is done." We shook hands at the door. "If I ever make it down to Georgia," he said, "I'll stop by." "Then I'll be waiting by the docks," I replied. I left Colorado in late April. The truck rolled east on the I-70 through Kansas, Missouri, miles and miles of open grassland, with no horizon, only sky. Each mile felt like another piece of the past being carried off by the wind. When I reached Savannah, Georgia, the air changed soft, salt, heavy, warm with life. I parked by the river where the late sun glazed the water in gold. Ships moored along the docks creaked against their ropes. I rented a small gray house facing the river and planted a young magnolia tree in the backyard, something living to keep me company. Days in Savannah moved slower. I woke early, brewed coffee, and walked the waterfront. People began to notice the old man who watched the river every morning. One day, a group of retired truckers struck up a conversation. They'd heard I'd been in the business. They invited me to join their club, a circle of men who swapped stories about highways, midnight hauls, and sleeping under desert stars. I said yes. Weeks later, they asked if I'd help set up a volunteer fund for aging drivers who could no longer get behind the wheel. I gave them what I'd once spent on company advertising. Watching them laugh and argue over the details, I felt something shift, a return to the simple kind of purpose. I'd forgotten the kind that smells like diesel and freedom. One morning, while I was pouring my coffee, the mailman knocked. A small envelope from Portland. Inside a letter in Claire's careful handwriting. She wrote that Ward Freight had signed its first state contract for clean logistics with California. "Everything's moving the way it should," she wrote. And at the bottom, one line, "Thank you, Dad, for teaching me that justice doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be right." I folded the letter, set it on the table, and stepped out to the porch. The Savannah River shimmered under the morning sun, liquid gold rippling, like someone had poured honey over time itself. A cargo ship slid past the Talmadge Bridge, its horn low and endless. I stood there a long while, listening to the river against the pilings, the sound of motion that never hurries. I thought of Evelyn, how she'd smile at the sight of me still checking the sky before starting the day. I thought of Ryan, not with anger, but with the dull ache of what-ifs. Maybe time in the quiet rhythm of confinement would teach him what I couldn't when I still stood as his father. And I thought of Claire, of Linda, of Mark, of everyone who had walked through the storm and come out carrying some small piece of the truth we tried to keep alive. The river kept flowing, and for the first time in years, so did I. I sit at the old wooden table facing the open window that overlooks the Savannah River. A blank page rests beneath my hand, steady now, the tremor mostly gone. Across the top, in blue ink, I've written the title, "The Freight of the Heart," the memoir I owe to myself and to those who walked beside me through the sharpest turns of my life. I begin with Evelyn. I can still see her smile on the porch of our cabin in Boulder, early morning light, tangled in the lavender rose, dew clinging to her hair. Her hand on my shoulder had always said more than words, that someone believed in me more than I ever did myself. I still hear her voice from that final letter, telling me not to let money change the man I am. Here in Savannah, as I write these lines, I realize that her words didn't just save me from the darkest night, they lit the road back to the husband and father I was always supposed to be. Turning the page feels like unfolding an old road map, each crease a storm survived. And there between the folds, Linda appears small, composed, unwavering. She was the one who saw me when I was little more than a heartbeat under hospital light. The night she pressed Evelyn's watch back into my palm, she didn't just return time to me, she returned life. The next page belongs to Claire. My daughter who walks forward on her own terms, never calling herself a hero, only asking what's right and doing it. I described the morning she stood before her new team at Ward Freight, speaking about green routes, cleaner engines, and the kind of responsibility that belongs to the land as much as to the ledger. She didn't need my legacy to rise. But I know she'll carry it in the right direction, straight, uncompromising, never trading her soul for a balance sheet. Then I pause the pen, heavy in my hand. A different name. Ryan. I write it slowly, each letter like lifting an oil drum in the old warehouse, deliberate, careful. There's no bitterness left. The bitterness burned itself out when justice did what it was meant to do. I write that I forgive my son because without forgiveness I would fail the very lesson life had been teaching me. But forgiveness, I add, is not forgetting. Justice moves to its own rhythm, and it does not bend for blood. It's a truth I learned too late, but learned well enough to leave written here for whoever may need it. Outside, a ship's horn drifts across the water, long and low, like the city breathing. The wind lifts the edge of the page, brushing my wrist, reminding me to go on. I think back to that February morning in court, Judge Evelyn Porter's steady gaze, the clean strike of the gavel, the way Ryan's head bowed when there were no more lies left to speak. I hadn't felt joy that day, only release, as if I'd finally set the last plank in a bridge I'd been building for decades. Now as I write, my heart beats calm and even, like the sound of a truck on a straight stretch of highway after a long storm. By noon, the river is brighter, reflecting gulls that rise and circle before vanishing into the sun. I add a passage about the retired truckers' meetings, the small fund we built so no one had to worry about gas money to the hospital. No applause, no speeches. Just laughter, rough and familiar, from men who'd once crossed mountain passes in the snow, and silence when another name was spoken, and there was no answer. That I realize is the part of life I love most, the part that doesn't need business cards, only the promise to show up on time. Beside the ink bottle lies an envelope, Claire's letter from Portland. She wrote that the California Clean Freight contract was running strong, that the new fleet was moving through the Central Valley on clean fuel, that one young driver had asked to leave early to attend his son's graduation. She thanked me for giving her a name tied to integrity. I fold the letter and tuck it under my notebook. My life has been filled with appointments, but the most important one, it seems, is this late appointment with myself to answer what I truly believe in. I write a short passage about Mark, the man who took the wrong turn and somehow found his way back, his hands still trembling as he signed the affidavit before the investigators. I thank him. And I remind myself in ink and truth that we are wrong when we think people must be flawless to do what's right. No one is flawless. There are only those willing to stand in the light when the time comes. Then I lift the pen for the final lines. My voice in my head sounds like the hum of an old diesel engine, low, steady, unhurried. People think revenge is victory, but sometimes simply living true to your values is justice. I add one last sentence in the language that has always given me the most precise words to close a journey. Peace doesn't need applause, only honesty. I set the pen down, but don't close the notebook yet. Outside the window, a cargo ship pulls away from the pier, the wake breaking gently against the stone bank. The magnolia tree in the yard has begun to bloom, dark green leaves, tight white buds, a promise that summer will arrive on time. I imagine Evelyn here telling me to leave the pages open for the ink to dry, to take a walk along the docks before lunch. I smile, hearing her voice carried faintly by the river wind. I close the notebook, my palm resting on the cover, as if sealing a door behind which all the grief and grace of a man's life have found their place. I shut my eyes and breathe in and out like the tide turning beneath the bridge. I don't wish for more. I only hope that what's right keeps finding the ones brave enough to do it wherever they are, in any quiet room, at any wooden table with a single blank page waiting. And if this story makes you think of family, of dignity, of justice, share it so someone else might find their road. If these moments bring you peace, pass it on. Because peace doesn't always come from forgiveness. Sometimes it comes from walking forward, with quiet honor, steady and clear, like a river passing through the city, always moving toward the open sea.